What if you could take a step back and look at the world? Explore the line between certainty and doubt. You are listening to the Illumination Hour with your host, Ellen Stallone. Greetings! Hello! Welcome to the Illumination Hour. This is me, your host, Ellen Stallone, and I have got something extra special planned today, something I think will light your fire. Spark an interest. Today, I'm going to be discussing one of the main fossil fuels that not only the U.S., but the entire world produces, one of the men that made great discoveries that revolutionized the industry, and some current issues related to this fossil fuel. This fossil fuel is known as coal. Everybody knows what coal is. It's a result of the stratification of peat that was formed during the Carboniferous period. It was compressed and heated and eventually turned into pockets of oil or coal. Now, there are a lot of stereotypes about the coal industry, including that it's dirty, it's unsafe, but that's not necessarily true today. In fact, without coal, we might not be able to survive. Coal is one of the cheapest, most plentiful energy sources on this planet. There's a reason that we still use it and keep it around. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of the timeline of how it was discovered and when it was used, some different cultures that used it, and how the process of mining for it and using it has evolved over the years. The first known usage of coal occurred sometime around 3490 BC in China. Now, locals probably found coal just on the surface of the ground and saw that it could be burned and used as a heat source, and then collected it and used it in their home furnaces. In Europe about 3,000 years ago, people would walk along the shores and collect something called sea coals, which would fall off of the cliff from erosion and wash up on the shore. This practice was continued for thousands of years, and in 1215, coal began to be traded in areas of Scotland and the northeast England. Much of this coal was taken to London to fuel industry there. Coal was mentioned by Aristotle and the Greek scientist Theophrastus between 300 and 200 BC. Romans also used coal in the 2nd century. So early coal mining processes were basically just people stumbling upon coal sources that were laying on the surface of the ground and digging it up with a shovel or a pickaxe and then carting it off to wherever it was being used. But one of the first advances in coal mining was that of bell mines. Now, bell mines were simple structures. They were tunnels that were drilled down into the ground, only about 30 feet, so there wasn't a big risk of collapse. Then, once inside the ground, the tunnelers would dig in a bell shape, which would allow them to extract as much coal as they needed without the roof collapsing on them. Soon after, surface mining began, as well as drift mining. Drift mining is also known as tunneling. Workers would dig tunnels straight into the ground, sometimes at an almost horizontal level. These tunnels were sometimes as small as 2.5 feet. And it wasn't just grown men that were working in these mines. It was also women and children. The children were usually used for things that no grown adult person could do, like crawling into these tiny tunnels and helping with ventilation. The women and children also sorted the coal and loaded it into baskets when it reached the surface. By the middle of the 16th century, supplies of wood were beginning to fail in Britain. Wood was the main source of heat at that time, so it was sort of a crisis situation they had on their hands. But with the use of coal as a domestic fuel, the industry rapidly expanded. By 1643, the French were sending coal and other supplies to the British colony at Boston. Even though America had huge reserves of coal, Europe was very averse to having any sort of competition. But by the Industrial Revolution, which began in the 18th century in Britain and later spread to Europe, North America, and Japan, they couldn't stop us from digging our own coal and using that, because our demand began increasing at a rate that trade could not support. The Industrial Revolution was mainly based on the availability of coal to power steam engines. Another interesting fact about coal mining is that much of the old left of British politics can trace its origins to coal mining areas, with the main labor unions being the Miners' Federation of Great Britain, founded in 1888. This group claimed 600,000 members in 1908, and later became a more centralized national union of mine workers. Now, obviously, mine workers were very concerned with their safety, as there were often explosions and deaths from asphyxiation or poisoning. The largest of these tragedies happened in 1907 in Monongah, Pennsylvania, where 425 workers died in an explosion. Many of the workers also got something known as black lung disease, which came from inhaling coal dust particles, which were often accumulated in the tunnels. Another thing that accumulated in these coal tunnels was an abundance of methane and sulfurous gases. Now, these are not very good to breathe in, and they can be poisonous or they can cause asphyxiation. Now, one of the ways that workers got around this was by carrying a canary in a cage. They would bring it with them because they found that canaries would often die before the workers would if there was no oxygen in the air. They would clip the claws off the canary so that when it did die, it wouldn't cling to the cage even after it had died, looking like it was still alive. As coal mines became deeper and bigger and longer, more and more accidents began to occur. The farther from the surface the coal miners went, the more likely it was that the roof would cave in, or the more gases would collect inside of the mine, making ventilation even more difficult. One of the most dangerous aspects of this was that sometimes the workers would ventilate the mines using lit fires inside of the tunnel. The idea behind it was that the fire would heat the air and it would help circulate, pushing the hot air out and bringing in cooler, fresh air. But often, because of the gaseous buildup, there would be dangerous and often fatal explosions. Mining accidents were very common, and coal mining back in those days was one of the most dangerous jobs to hold. This is one of the reasons why workers' unions began forming all over in coal mining industry. Not only the harsh conditions, but also because the working hours were ridiculously long. These people were doing back-breaking shoveling and mining for 12 hours, sometimes more than that, every single day. But now I want to introduce you to a man by the name of Joseph Francis Joy. He may well have been one of the greatest revolutionaries in the coal mining industry. This brief autobiography about Joseph Joy is brought to you by joyglobal.com. Joseph Francis Joy was born September 13th, 1883, in a small mining town of Cumberland, Maryland. This was a time when hard work, practical intelligence, and thrift were needed to exist. At the early age of 12, as his father and brother before him, Joe Joy went to work at the nearby coal mine. He started as a slate picker, and by age 15, he was working underground as a face miner using a pick and a shovel. He would drill the face with a handheld auger, charge the holes with dynamite to shoot down the coal, and then hand-load it into small rail-mounted cars pulled by mules or ponies. This was hard, dangerous work for strong men, let alone a young boy. While lying on his side soaked in mine water for long hours as he labored, this bright young man visualized a better way to do the work. Determined to learn and blessed with a precocious ability to persuade others, Joy won the favor of his sisters. They gathered and sold chestnuts to assist his struggling family in their efforts to finance a correspondence course for him in mechanical engineering. On his 20th birthday, the rare combination of his working knowledge, fortitude, and specialized education, Joy produced his first sketch of a unique digging and loading device. He proudly shared his idea with a close friend who later provided convincing evidence of Joy's invention of a mechanical loader. His work in the mines continued, where he held every job, from pumper to general superintendent. All during this time, Joy attempted to convince others of his mechanical loading device invention. He circulated his drawing, trying to persuade various mining companies to help him build his gathering arm-loading machine. This marked the beginning of an uphill struggle to win his first of a total of 190 patents in his name. Joseph's accomplishments are as remarkable as his tenacious nature and aspiring ambition. In 1913, at the age of 30, Joe took a lower-paying job in exchange for the opportunity to work on the development of his machine. He was hired as an engineer for Jeffrey Manufacturing Company, where he spent his days in Pocahontas, Virginia, as a team member, developing cutting and loading equipment, which included the Model 34A, 37A, and 38A machines. At night, he continued to develop his gathering arm loader, which he eventually presented to Jeffrey management. He tried to sell Jeffrey the rights to his machine, but his offer was declined because his employer believed that Joy's invention was not his own. They believed the machine already had been invented by a man named E.C. Morgan in 1910. Joy was not the kind of person to be easily dissuaded. He took his invention to senior officer John A. Donaldson at the Pittsburgh Coal Company. He demonstrated his model on Donaldson's desk, using dry dog food as the loaded material to be conveyed. Donaldson was so impressed that he requested Jeffrey to manufacture this machine. The first gathering arm loader was shipped to Pittsburgh Coal Company's Summer No. 2 mine on September 27, 1916. Joy applied for a patent for this gathering arm loader and continued to work on his testing and development underground. He was awarded a patent in his name for the machine in 1919. The machine proved to be so successful that Jeffrey Manufacturing Company tried to claim rights to Joy's invention. This resulted in Joy leaving his position with Jeffrey Manufacturing and ultimately led to a patent lawsuit, which, by the way, Joy successfully won in 1924. He then moved his family to Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania, and with his patent in hand, went to work as a consultant to the Pittsburgh Coal Company. Joy built 5 similar machines while working for the Pittsburgh Coal Company, all of which were track-mounted. Donaldson, while pleased with the progress of the machine, suggested placing it on crawlers to increase its flexibility. However, initial trials seemed unsuccessful, and the crawler project was terminated. Joy viewed this project termination as simply another challenge, and believed that he could develop a successful crawler. He also wanted to organize his own company to manufacture and sell his machines to the mines. In one of Joy's final consulting sessions with Pittsburgh Coal, Donaldson pointed out the importance of business capital. With a fond regard for Joy, Mr. Donaldson sent him to visit the office of Pittsburgh Coal Company's legal counsel for assistance, and Joy began to organize his business. On June 4th, 1920, the first crawler-mounted Joy loader was manufactured at Trailer Engineering in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Greater mobility proved itself, delighted Joy, and promoted more interest in his machine. A major machine order was subcontracted by Joy to Charleroi Iron Works in Charleroi, Pennsylvania. The first model Joy 4B sold for $2,800 in September 1922 to the D.J. Kennedy Company, which sold coal, bricks, and building supplies. Soon, the loaders were successfully operating in West Virginia, Illinois, and Saskatchewan, Canada. By 1923, Joy was looking for a place to call his own, close to a progressive and productive mining area. The site he chose was located in Evansville, Indiana. The Model 4A, 4BU, and 5BU, U referring to its underground application, were developed and manufactured at Joy's first commercial assembly plant in Evansville. 184 4BUs were sold as the first commercial loading machines of their kind. The 5BU, however, was truly the forerunner of the modern loader, and the first with an articulated conveyor tail section. The first 5BU was manufactured in February 1923 and installed in what is now known today as Freeman's Coals Orient No. 1 mine in West Frankfort, Illinois. Financial difficulties related to rapid growth overwhelmed Joy. He continued to subcontract machines to the Charleroi Iron Works, since the Evansville plant was simply too small for continued development of the 4BU and 5BU machines. Joy was unable to obtain a lease on a larger Evansville area plant. Joe Joy approached the Coburn Machine Tool Company of Cleveland, Ohio for help, and they responded with an agreement to refinance Joy for $106,000 in stock and $19,000 in cash. The transaction included turning over the Coburn plant in Franklin, Pennsylvania to Joy Manufacturing Company, with full ownership of building and lands. In early 1924, the Indiana operation moved to Franklin. At that time, West Virginia and Pennsylvania coal fields were in rapid development, and there appeared to be excellent potential for loaders. The Franklin location was also near other desirable raw materials and steel foundries. Operations began on March 1, 1924, and the Franklin plant became the first to bear Joy's name. One transplanted employee said, "We came here by car in April of that year, and all you could see was hills. My mother took one look at those hills and said that she was taking the next train home." For approximately 50 Hoosiers from Indiana, the steep hills of Pennsylvania had become a new home. 186 loading machines were produced from the end of March until December 1st, 1924, all successfully incorporating field-proven Joy developments. However, financial difficulties plagued the operation, and payroll was progressively difficult to meet. At the same time, Union leader John L. Lewis called a strike in the bituminous and anthracite coal fields. The effects on Joy's markets was disastrous. 50 machines in production in the plant were held up by creditors, and on April 2nd, 1925, Joe Joy resigned as president, while a committee of creditors took steps to pay off $500,000 of debt. Resigning from his own company was a major blow to Joe Joy. A photo from his private family album reflects his sentiments. The caption reads, "Life's labor lost. Broke 1925." The photo also shows Joy dressed warmly for his new and dramatic project, halfway around the world. Joseph Joy had become the director of mine mechanization in the Donetsk Basin in Russia, where it's interesting to note that a young miner who was named Nikita Khrushchev claimed that he ran a Joy loader at about this time. For 2 long years, Joy, along with his American engineering associates and support personnel, courageously devoted themselves to the mechanization of Russian coal mines. However, Russia was now under Stalin's rule, and the area was turning into a political hotbed. In 1927, fearing for the lives of his staff and himself, Joe commandeered a railroad locomotive and escaped into Poland. When Joy returned to the United States, he pursued his life as an inventor, including working at the Bethlehem Steel Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on the design of a conveyor system. Subsequently, he was hired as Assistant Vice President of Engineering at the Marion Shovel Company in Ohio. In 1930, Joy founded and was president of the Joy Brothers Company, where he developed a system of coal saws that could produce black coal. Coal saw users at this time had an advantage in the domestic market until President Roosevelt set a floor price on slat coal of 75 cents a ton. This prompted Joy to sell the company to Sullivan Machinery Company, who asked him to remain as general manager of the mining machinery division in Claremont, New Hampshire. In a 4-year period, he helped to create 9 new cutting machines along with the development of a saw loader, which was basically a primitive continuous miner. Joy returned to Joy Manufacturing Company to assist them in another patent litigation against Jeffrey Manufacturing. As engineering consultant in Franklin, Joe created the Joy Safety Coal Drill. Had today's mine safety regulations been in effect, the machine would have been an instant success. Later, Joy was called to service with the Army as a senior ordnance engineer, in charge of development for the Chief of Army Ordnance. Among other accomplishments, he developed a seal of rubber and bronze cuttings, which greatly improved the recoiling mechanism of large guns. In 1944, Joy left the Army and returned to Pittsburgh. For 2 years, he worked as vice president and general manager of Warren Welding and Engineering Company in Ohio. There was never a shortage of work or opportunity for Joe Joy. Numerous mining machinery companies were trying to hire him as a consultant, but it was A.S. Noisen, executive vice president of Joy Manufacturing, who played the key role in bringing Joy back to the company that kept his name after reorganizing in 1928. In 1946, Joy Manufacturing Company awarded Joe Joy a lifetime contract at $1,000 a month, plus materials and expenses, to develop new equipment and methods for the mining industry. Joy moved to Brookside Farms in Pittsburgh, where he lived until moving to Fort Pierce, Florida in 1954. In both locations, he had a well-equipped machine shop and designers working for him. Numerous people from Joy Manufacturing Company visited Joe to share information on his latest developments. Joseph Francis Joy died in February of 1957. He accumulated an impressive 190 patents during his career. His major inventions were recognized as milestones in the history of underground mining mechanization. He had pioneered new concepts in hydraulics, modern control and power circuits, trackless mining equipment, efficient gearing and seal designs, as well as dozens of other firsts in the industry. His contributions changed forever the way minerals are mined. Of course, the most important invention of Joe Joy's was the loading machine, which was a seemingly simple machine that actually accounted for a 30% increase in productivity of mining at that time. You just load the coal onto this conveyor belt and it just dumps it into the cart. This saved a lot of back-breaking labor of shoveling for the workers in the mine. It allowed them to work shorter hours and have less intensive work, actually improving their working conditions. Now, obviously, Joseph Joy was a great man. He was a brilliant inventor that was motivated to help not only himself, but the people around him. He contributed to an industry that has continuously grown ever since its inception. Fast forward to today, and coal has radically changed our entire world. Today, different methods of mining have been developed, such as continuous mining, surface mining, and longwall mining. Surface mining is twice as efficient as the other kinds of mining, and accounts for 65% of the coal produced today. Because of surface mining, massive machines are produced, including 400-ton trucks used to carry the coal that is produced from these facilities. Giant cranes that can fit 2 Greyhound buses lengthwise inside of them are used to scoop up the coal from these mines. Another modern invention that transformed mining is the continuous miner, which can mine in 1 minute what took in the 1920s an entire day to produce, up to 6,000 tons a day. Longwall mining is more like shearing away at long stretches of coal, breaking it into large clumps, and then scooping it up onto a conveyor. This method can produce up to 40,000 tons a day. Roof joining is another technology that we've developed that helps prevent collapse. Workers drill into the strata and bolt them together, so multiple weak strata are combined to add their strength together to keep them from collapsing. In the United States, 55% of electricity is produced from coal. Around the world, coal accounts for 40% of the world's electricity. On average, Americans use what is equivalent to about 21 pounds of coal per day in electricity. Obviously, coal is a major part of our world, and it's not something that we can easily dismiss by saying that it's dirty or dangerous, which it's certainly not. I mean, I understand if you want to say that burning coal is a dirty technology, which by some accounts it is. I mean, burning anything releases carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But what would our world be like without coal? I don't think that we could have many of these modern conveniences that we have if we didn't use coal technology, because it's so cheap and plentiful, and other alternatives aren't developed enough yet to take over for coal. If a coal mine worker from 70 years ago were transported somehow to today's coal mining industry, they would be amazed at how much mechanization has gone into this industry and how safe it is for the workers. In the U.S., coal mining directly employs nearly 136,000 people. And if we continue mining at our current rate of use, we have another 235 years of supply left. So we know that there's a limit to the amount that we can use, but we have enough time to develop newer, better ways of creating energy for ourselves in that time. Now, environmentalists have raised some big questions and concerns regarding the coal industry and our use of coal for producing electricity. They say that coal is one of the largest sources of air pollution in the United States. It can cause smog, soot, acid rain, global warming, and toxic air emissions. It generates waste in the form of ash, sludge, toxic chemicals, and waste heat, which creates more environmental problems. They say it's an issue to have as a fuel supply because the mining, transporting, and storing coal levels mountains and pollutes the land, water, and air. Coal plants need billions of gallons of cooling water and harm wildlife. A typical 500 megawatt coal plant burns 1.4 million tons of coal each year. As of 2012, there are 572 operational coal plants in the U.S. with an average capacity of 547 megawatts. Coal pollutes when it's mined, transported to the power plant, stored, and burned. While it's true that coal mining plants do pollute water, as they need water to wash the coal when it comes into the facility, that water is stored in tanks and recycled. Regardless, power plants being built today emit 90% less pollution than the plants that they replaced from the 1970s, according to the National Energy Technology Laboratory. They emit 40% less CO2 than the average 20th century coal plant, according to the World Coal Institute. Regulated emissions from coal-based electricity generation have decreased overall by over 40% since the 1970s, while coal use has tripled, according to government statistics. Whereas before the 1970s, surface coal miners would dig up the coal, exposing these giant gashes in the earth, and then just leave them when they were done. Now there are reclamation projects that replace the soil and plant trees over it. These reclamation projects have reclaimed more than 2.3 million acres of mine land over the past 25 years. Since 1978, U.S. coal mines have paid more than $7 billion to reclaim mines that were abandoned prior to laws requiring reclamation. On top of that, approximately 5 million acres of land have been mined in the U.S. to produce coal, and most of the land not under active mining has been or is being reclaimed to the standards set by law. So I don't believe anyone that says that coal companies are just evil and want your money. They're definitely cleaning up their act in a big way. The only thing that coal companies and environmentalists seem to agree on is that the best way to use coal is through coal gasification, which is when the coal is blown through with oxygen and steam while also being heated. This produces a gaseous mixture of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, water vapor, and molecular hydrogen. Some other byproducts are also produced, like tar and phenols, which depend on the specific gasification technology being used. The tar can be used to build roads. The phenols can be used to manufacture plastics. Some of the other byproducts are benzol, which is a motor fuel, creosote, which is a wood preservative, and creosols, which are disinfectants. From its original development until the wide-scale adoption of natural gas, more than 500,000 manufactured gas plants were in existence in the United States alone. The process of manufacturing gas usually produced a number of byproducts that contaminated the soil and groundwater in and around the manufacturing plant. So many former town gas plants are serious environmental concerns, and cleanup and remediation costs are often pretty high. Manufactured gas plants were typically sited near or adjacent to waterways that were used to transport in coal and for the discharge of water waste contaminated with tar, ammonia, and drip oils, as well as outright waste tars and tar water emulsions. Coal gasification processes require controls and pollution prevention to measure and mitigate pollutant emissions. Some of these pollutants include ash and slag, carbon dioxide, mercury, arsenic, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. So we seem to be facing a major problem. On one hand, coal has become absolutely indispensable to us as a society. We need it to power our world. And on the other hand, it's still a pollutant, and many environmental institutes are fighting against it. Oftentimes you'll see that they use fear propaganda to convince people that coal is not the answer to our energy problems, although in reality, it is. We can't do anything without coal. We don't have anything to replace it. So what do? Even if it is polluting our environment? Do we make them pay to reclaim the land or to clean up their water? There's really no clear solution, but we can't say that it absolutely is getting rid of coal-based energy. Well, as far as the environmentalists go, It seems that they've been breaking a lot of ground recently as far as putting an end to coal production. Although it's not actually going to happen anytime soon, don't worry, but there are processes in place to reduce our use of coal, or at least an attempt to. Here I have an article on environmentalaction.org titled, "Putting a Nail in Coal's Coffin." The White House just announced a halt to new coal mine leases on federal lands while they conduct a comprehensive review of how coal impacts our economy and climate. Since coal is in decline and a major source of global warming pollution, there's every reason to believe that this is another big step by the Obama team towards abandoning the all-of-the-above energy policy in favor of keeping fossil fuels in the ground and funding a rapid, just transition to 100% clean power. Me jumping in here, I just want to add, there's no such thing as 100% clean power. Even nuclear power and solar panels or wind turbines have some sort of pollution that comes along with them, even in the production or byproducts. This 100% clean power of which they speak is a mystical animal. It doesn't exist yet. It's basically modern-day folklore. Anyway, it's already being called a nail in the coffin of the rapidly dying coal industry because 40% of coal production in the U.S. comes off of federal lands. It also begs the question, who is next? If Keystone XL was too damaging to our climate to build, as the president has already said, and if coal mining on federal lands is too dirty for the energy future we need to build, will an end to leasing offshore oil reserves be next? Hi, jumping in here again. So just so you guys know, Keystone XL is an oil pipeline that runs between Alberta, Illinois, and Texas. That part has already been used. What the president said no to was the next stage in construction, which was supposed to run between Alberta and Nebraska. But that is what is being canceled, even though the majority of the pipeline is already in existence. What about a ban on fracking for gas on public lands? There's no denying this is a big step for our movement to end fossil fuels, but it's only a step. The kind that this organization hopes to see the president take more of during his last year in office. In his final State of the Union speech, President Obama said,
"Now we've got to accelerate the transition away from old, dirtier energy sources. Rather than subsidize the past, we should invest in the future, especially in communities that rely on fossil fuels. We do them no favor when we don't show them where the trends are going. And that's why I'm going to push to change the way we manage our oil and coal resources so that they better reflect the cost they impose on taxpayers and our planet. And that way we put money back into those communities and put tens of thousands of Americans to work building a 21st century transportation system."
We had no idea at the time just how far and how fast he intended to move. With today's ruling, the president stepped past climate deniers and do-nothings in Congress to take real action, protecting our health and the health of the planet. This isn't just about winning the war on coal. It's a warning to all fossil fuels that the end is nigh. Now it's time to thank the president and also turn up the pressure to stop offshore drilling, ban fracking, and end fossil fuel extraction on our planet. Whoa, wait a minute. What? I can understand your concern, but you want me to thank the president? I'm not going to thank him for making life more expensive, not only for me and all of the other regular citizens, but for people who actually run, own, and work at these factories, in these industries. They're being forced out of jobs when clearly there is still high market demand for fossil fuels. There's no way that this can be economically sustainable. Using taxpayer dollars to develop things that don't work that well or that not very many people actually want. It seems to me like this is an economic system that is doomed to fail because we're spending more on it, we're investing in it, it's not really working out so well. Why don't we just let this technology develop at its own pace, just like coal and other fossil fuels did? And then we can see how successful it really becomes when people actually start wanting or needing it. So no, I'm not going to be grateful that there's some overlord forcing industries out of existence and forcing this new, falsely claimed 100% clean energy industry into existence. Anyway, back to the article. In a few years, we may even look back on this as the moment when the Keep It in the Ground movement officially became the position of the U.S. government. So there are many people in the world that would like to see an end to the use of coal as an energy source. But do they really understand how important coal is to our economy? It seems to me like they don't grasp the simple fact that more than half of our electricity is produced using coal, and that removing that half of the energy source in the United States and around the world for that matter, which I'm sure is what they're ultimately going to go for, that would catastrophically shut down so many businesses and even people's houses. We'd go back to basically the electricity that people had decades ago. I think if climate change people are really serious about sticking to their morals, maybe they shouldn't use electronics, seeing as the electrical company that produces their electricity with which they charge their devices might be using coal power. Even if they were to buy an electric vehicle, something that's supposedly zero emission, they'd still have to charge it using that electricity. And if you drive a gasoline-powered car, or worse yet, a diesel-powered car, that is direct fossil fuel use. So you pretty much have a very limited number of options when it comes to transportation. As I said before, it accounts for 40% of the world's electricity and 55% of the electricity in the United States. It's the cheapest source of energy. It's by far cheaper than nuclear, natural gas, and oil. Hydropower usually is slightly cheaper. However, there are problems with hydroenergy, including no new facilities because of public outcry when river valleys are dammed, and peak demand time problems, because rivers run dry in the dead of summer when peak air conditioning is needed, and rivers are frozen in the dead of winter when peak heating is needed. Coal also provides a stable source of energy, so we don't have to worry about oil embargoes or sudden scarcity like you experience with natural gas. And there's a very plentiful supply both inside the United States and in other foreign countries. Coal is nothing more than ancient wood which has been under pressure for millions of years. It's not as sinister as you may have been led to believe. A good way to think about coal is to imagine it as a collection of energy. The way it was produced can attest to that. As the trees and ferns of the Carboniferous period grew, they absorbed photon energy from the sun, storing it in their biomass. As they were compressed, this matter became more condensed. When we dig up coal and burn it, we are releasing that energy that was collected from the sun millions of years ago. Coal provides many jobs, and jobs that are in the U.S., no less. Unlike other forms of energy, coal provides many jobs in removing coal from the earth, transporting it to the utility, burning it, and properly disposing of coal ash. With modern technology for coal mining, it can be mined and burnt with little environmental impact. There have been tremendous strides in environmental responsibility with coal mining and burning. However, there's still pressure of global warming. If we burn less fossil fuels, what, as a practical matter, is our energy alternative? Nuclear? Hydro? Solar? There's really no practical way to provide the massive amounts of electricity needed to run our country through solar energy. Right now, it's viewed as impractical. Coal mining reclamation can also give the surface landowner many more options for developing his land. In the mountainous terrains, a mining process called mountaintop removal can create very valuable and usable level land for the surface owner. The surface owner not only gets his land developed, he's usually paid 50 cents a ton for the inconvenience of the use of his surface. Surface mining cannot occur without the specific consent of the surface owner. If the surface owner is lucky enough to own the coal rights, he's looking at another $2 a ton for royalty payments. So I don't know if I discussed this one as thoroughly as I would have liked to earlier, but blasting the tops off of mountains is also something that really irks those environmentalists. And I can kind of see why, because after you blow the top off the mountain, you just kind of shove the rocks off to the side, and they usually fall into streams, which then, clog up the stream, change its direction, basically soak up all the water so that the plants and trees downstream don't have enough of it. It's pretty detrimental, but I'm sure we can come up with a better solution. Anyway, in 1977, the federal surface mining law was passed that required coal operators to reclaim the land in an equal, if not better, condition that existed prior to mining. The prudent use of coal will allow the U.S. the time needed to develop viable alternative energy sources, primarily solar and fuel from grain, without any negative impact on our national economy. Overall, in 5 years' time, all of the coal companies in the U.S. have grossed an average of $8.4 trillion. So what do you think? Is coal worth the trouble? Is it worth the environmental impacts? I think it is. I think there's no way that we can get around the fact that we need it, as of now. It's our main source of energy. We have so much developed and devoted to coal energy. We can't just cut off our use of it. And in fact, what would we be losing if we did? Of course, over time, I hope that there are better technologies developed, such as nuclear, which is a far cleaner way of producing energy. But for now, I think we should stick with fossil fuels. I also used to be really hopeful about solar energy, and I still think that the potential for that to be developed into something that is longer lasting, less toxic, and also batteries that can store energy in a much more efficient way than we currently have. I really want to see those developed, and I think that it can happen. We just have to devote a lot more time to it than the government is willing to allow us to have. And also, I think we should keep in mind that pretty much every action that humans carry out creates some sort of pollution. It's just something to consider. So, before I end the show, I want to share this clip with you that basically gives you some insight into the current situation with the coal industry. According to this clip, the U.S. coal industry is on decline. Now, does that maybe have something to do with recent legislation? Who knows? Anyway, here is the clip for you.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Peres coming to you from Baltimore. A new report from the London-based Carbon Tracker Initiative titled The U.S. Coal Crash, Evidence for Structural Change, says that the American coal industry is in trouble and that the future doesn't look any better for the industry. Is this the future of what's to come for all fossil fuels? Or is dirty coal energy source merely being replaced by another? With us to discuss the report is one of its authors from London, England, is Luke Sessoms. Luke is senior researcher at Carbon Tracker Initiative. He leads work on the coal sector. He also co-authors reports on stranded assets and wasted capital in fossil fuel industry. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke.
Thank you for having me.
Luke, let's take a look at your report. Give us the broad strokes in terms of the findings that people must know.
Well, this report analyzes what has been a pretty rapid decline in the U.S. coal sector and some of the drivers that have underpinned that transition. Now, in particular, the report concludes that the emergence of cheap shale gas, the price of gas has in fact fallen 80% since 2008. The emergence of cheap shale gas substituting for coal, and the role that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the regulations that it has brought in to tackle pollution on a number of different levels has both served to constrain U.S. demand for coal. Now, we like to think of it as almost a 1-2 punch. The gas industry took the legs out from underneath the U.S. coal sector, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regulations have made it very, very difficult for the sector to recover. Now, we think that this shift is structural in nature, rather than being a cyclical change in which an upturn may come about relatively soon. We think these are structural shifts, and therefore the US coal industry could see a slow decline over the next few years.
Now, one of the things that were reported by some other sources is that while the use of coal in the United States has gone down, production actually has not been reduced, and in fact it's shifting to exporting coal. Did you factor that in your report?
It's certainly something that we looked at, but the data suggests that isn't happening. The US EIA, which is the leading source of coal data in the US, actually suggests that over 250 coal mines closed between 2011 and 2013. Now, that suggests that production is lowering in the US, but certainly you're right in saying that a number of the US producers were planning on exporting a lot of this product, which was no longer demanded in the US domestically. However, in the report, we suggest that perhaps there aren't as many prosperous end markets for that product. China has seen its coal consumption actually decline this year for the first time since the turn of the century. That is a major, major shift, considering it's a country that consumes half of the world's coal. We are seeing similar downside demand factors occurring in India. So we think actually the seaborne trade market isn't actually as prosperous as a lot of these US producers believe it could be.
So your report supports the evidence that this is now a lot of the coal infrastructure is stranded assets.
Yeah, stranded assets is a concept that we've focused on since our inception here at the Carbon Tracker Initiative. And this essentially relates to assets which don't actually deliver the return expected of them when the investment was made, when the investment decision point was made. And yeah, we're certainly seeing, with regards to the coal mine closures that I mentioned earlier, but also that it's occurring in the utility sector. Since 2010, 14 gigawatts of US coal plants have in fact retired early. And we consider this to be a trend that will continue. Big investment banks such as Deutsche Bank actually forecast that the amount of coal plants that could retire by 2030 could be as much as 92 gigawatts. Now, this is huge amounts of stranded assets that will be passed on to the investors in these companies who will suffer significant value destruction as a result.
Right. And as far as the report is concerned, you stated that the Dow Jones Total Market Coal Sector Index is down 76% over the last 5 years, compared to the Dow Jones Industrial Average that is up 69% over the same period. So you also say that one of the drivers is the increased use of shale gas. So is it a matter of replacing one greenhouse gas emitting fossil fuel with another?
Well, I guess that depends on your standpoint on whether or not gas, and shale gas in particular, is an effective transition fuel. Now, it's clearly a very politically sensitive topic and one which is debated heavily both in academia and policy making as to whether or not shale gas actually has climate benefits in terms of lower greenhouse gas emissions than coal. Now, we haven't yet looked at that at Carbon Tracker, and we don't actually touch on that point in the report, but if you manage to keep fugitive emissions under control, it is undeniable that burning gas is about 50% lower in terms of its carbon intensity than burning coal.
Now, when you look at certain predictions in terms of the growth of the oil sector, reports are still saying that the coal sector is expected to grow. What's your response to that?
Again, I mean, it really depends on your opinion on what will happen in non-OECD countries. Now, coal consumption within OECD countries is already declining. So that means that the future of the coal industry really is relying on a few big, major non-OECD emerging markets. And I mentioned China, which is already beginning to decline its coal consumption, which is an unparalleled shift compared to the levels of growth they've been experiencing over the last 10 years. But then if you also take India out of the equation, as they try and actually source a lot more of their demand domestically with their own production, they recently announced that they plan to cut imports of coal to zero within the next 3 years. Now, that spells big problems for major coal exporters such as the US, but also Indonesia and Australia, and should serve as a warning to investors in those companies.
Right. And let's turn to the political situation here in the United States. The Republican majority in the U.S. House and Senate have called Obama's stricter regulations on coal burning plans a war on coal. And for those who work in the coal industry and in places like West Virginia and Kentucky, where, you know, the heart of coal production in the United States, who's relied on this sector for livelihood and survival, is there a plan, I guess, in the environmental movement for transitioning these workers from fossil fuel industries, or in this case, coal, to clean energy?
It's a good question. I mean, jobs will obviously be created from the growth markets that result from this energy transition and the transition to a lower carbon economy. Now, with regards to Obama's regulations, it's proven that they will deliver significant health, environmental, and climatic benefits. For example, the Clean Power Plan that was most recently announced, which rules or proposes that U.S. existing coal plants have to reduce their emissions by 30%. That's estimated to deliver $55 to $93 billion of climatic, environmental, and health benefits by 2020 alone. Now, I think it's clear to see from those numbers the motivation behind the introduction of these U.S. EPA regulations.
All right. I thank you so much for joining us today, Luke, and we look forward to ongoing reports from Carbon Tracker.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.
Well, I hope that you've all enjoyed the show and learned a few things about the coal industry. You can email me with your questions and comments at illuminationhour@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. See you next week.